We don't need a wall. I think
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So, El Paso, this town that I was born and raised in, where Amy and I are raising Ulysses and Molly and Henry, happens to be one of, if not the safest cities in the United States of America. And what makes us so safe is that we are a city of immigrants, and we treat one another with respect and dignity. I think that's fundamental to security, to success, to safety.
Do you want to see the Dreamers protected?
Absolutely.
Chuck Schumer was willing to trade President Trump the wall for the DREAM Act. Would you take that deal?
No, I wouldn't.
From Texas town halls to late-night talk shows, the Democratic candidate for Senate in Texas, Beto O'Rourke, is spreading his message of unity and acceptance. O'Rourke's opponent, Senator Ted Cruz, is worried as polls show a narrowing margin between the two candidates, a point Stephen Colbert made last night before he interviewed the Democratic candidate.
Earlier this summer, in order to save the Cruz campaign, Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick showed up in Washington to deliver an urgent plea to White House officials: send President Donald Trump. You know it's bad when you need backup from a man with a 36% approval rating. Here's how scared Ted Cruz is of Beto O'Rourke. He bought ads on my show tonight to counter his interview.
Joining us now is Patrick Svitek, political reporter for the Texas Tribune. Thank you for being with us. We've been talking about Beto. The moments that have gone viral have certainly captured our imaginations, but we thought it was time for some ground truth. What is happening on the ground in what is thought to be deep red Texas?
Yeah, we're obviously seeing a lot of enthusiasm surrounding his campaign, and it's been sustained and growing enthusiasm, which has been somewhat impressive considering that he has been campaigning now for well over a year, traveling across the state pretty much nonstop since March or April of 2017. And I think that what's resonating is kind of this sense of authenticity that you see with him, whether it's these town halls, these kind of come one, come all town halls that he's having across the state, whether it's live streaming kind of every moment from the campaign trail. And, and that certainly provides something of a contrast with Cruz, who certainly, can be a relentless campaigner, but can also have this image of being kind of politically calculating or just kind of overly scripted. And so you do see just kind of this stylistic contrast there.
Stylistic. And Ted Cruz, I say this with a decent amount of authority, is not well liked among a lot of Republicans. Does Beto have a chance of winning over some independents and some sort of centrist Republicans in the state who sometimes swing statewide elections?
I think so. I think this is a slice of that part of the electorate is in play. I think it remains to be seen how big it is. But, whether it was, before Ted Cruz ran for president, after Ted Cruz ran for president, after the kind of 2016 Trump endorsement controversy, there's always been some Republicans in Texas who have just not been a huge fan of him, either personally or because of his kind of brand of politics. And, he is kind of this conservative firebrand, and he's, clearly made some enemies in Washington and certainly enemies within his own party.
One of the ways that I thought after the election that I should have known that Donald Trump was going to win was at Costco. There were lots of Trump-Pence bumper stickers. When I drove around the rural parts of Connecticut, there were more yard signs. And it is not scientific, but after the fact, you sometimes look back at those anecdotal proof points and say, yeah, I saw this coming. What does Texas look like right now? Are there Beto signs in places where there usually aren't Democratic yard signs? Are there people talking about this race where they usually aren't talking politics for a midterm? What's going on in the state?
Yeah, yard signs are actually a huge story in the state right now. There's been, Cruz supporters themselves have expressed alarm about seeing Beto yard signs in their kind of traditionally Republican neighborhoods or kind of traditionally moderate or independent-minded neighborhoods. The Cruz campaign has, talked about how yard signs don't vote and how there hasn't been a huge investment on their part so far. But it's just psychologically, it's stuff like that, I think, that has worried some Cruz supporters and given hope and optimism, obviously, to O'Rourke supporters, however anecdotal it may be.
Mike Murphy, what do you make of this race?
Well, I remember Wendy Davis in the red tennis shoes. We've had this narrative before about the magic Democrat in Texas.
Was she ever within 3 or 4 points for sustained?
Oh, I think there might have been an early poll where it's 5 or something. But
I think there's
it's
6
Texas.
points that have him within 3 points.
Here are the 3 things that need to happen for the perfect storm for him in a Republican state. One, he's got to raise a lot of money. He's doing that on the internet. Two, you're going to have to make sure the race is not ideological, but a personality contest. He's a very likable guy. Ted has been rather cruelly, I think, described by a British newspaper as a sitcom vampire. So if it's a personality contest, that's better for Beto. And finally, you need a blue storm surge, not 5%. You need 10% because it's still Texas. It is getting more purple, but he'll have to put a lot of stuff together. So do I think it's possible? Yes. Would I bet heavy money? I'd take Cruz. One
of the dangers seems to me when you make too many parallels to national figures. A lot of people talking about how he has that it factor that President or then State Senator Obama had. People comparing his communication skills to other national figures. That seems double-edged.
Well, I mean, look, he's definitely a rock star right now in the Democratic Party. We talk about him. We're excited about him. We can't believe what he's able to do in a deep red, as you stated, Texas State. But he's also the right combination of grassroots activism.
Yeah.
He's on message. He's unapologetically running as a progressive in Texas.
He's for impeachment. He said he's going to impeach the president. He parted with Schumer there on the deal that he would have done on Dreamers.
And also, some polls have showed that building a wall is very unpopular in Texas. Trade war is unpopular. The GOP tax cut is unpopular. So there are things there that really is helping him in many ways that is hurting Ted Cruz.
Yeah, he's sort of late-stage Bobby Kennedy, very appealing, very progressive, very human. The thing, as Mike said, is, and I haven't looked at these demographic numbers in a while, I mean, Texas is getting more purple, it is getting more diverse, but until it crosses that threshold in sort of like 2040, it's not really the time and place for a Democrat to win. What I would say, though, is in this age of social media where we know everything about everybody, Abraham Lincoln ran for president after losing a race for Congress. Beto is now a national figure and could actually run for national office just based on what we know about him and from seeing that viral video of him defending the NFL players and the right to protest.
Two things here. First of all, Texas is a red state. It is not the most pro-Trump of the red states. Trump underperformed in Texas. So I think there's something going on there. And second,
well, the thing going on there is his crassness and his debasement of the office is not really appreciated in a state like Texas.
Your was not mine. But I would say that our work is going around to almost every county. He is out there asking for votes. He is doing what Barack Obama did in a place like Iowa. He went to places where Democrats are never seen. And he's planting the flag and he's saying, this is who I am. And he's not doing a thing where he's like being a fake Democrat or a half Democrat. He's like, I'm a Democrat. I'm a progressive. That's powerful to people.
Means for a bumpy October, they're going to drop the ideological hammer on him really, really big. But if he wins,
they've tried it.
Straight to the presidential primary, he'll be very formidable.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.